Well, welcome, and thank you for being here at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. I just wanted to start out in the spirit of Congressman Frost's words. I just would love to take a moment and close our eyes to acknowledge, I have to do some stats today, the over 130 kids that have died just since the beginning of this year from guns, and to also imagine the future he's speaking of. Thank you. So, have a rich array of friends here, and I just want to start out by saying that my craft is storytelling. I want to thank South by for giving us this platform, and friends who are here. I want to thank my friend Barney Grossman who helped us put this together. And I think that all of these people here, for me, really represent a sort of fearless courage. And I've been blessed to have two films at this festival, both dealing with gun violence. And the first of them, which was called Newtown, was about the fallout of collective trauma in a community we probably all remember back in 2012 when 26 children and their school teachers were killed in Newtown, Connecticut. But what I didn't know when I made that movie was there was this 15-year-old kid sitting in Orlando, Florida, who was so jarred by that news that he managed to figure out a way to get himself up to D.C. and go to a vigil. And he would go to that vigil nearly every year, culminating in the 10th year of the clip we just saw with Congressman Frost, who is now our first Gen Zer to go to our Congress, which is hopeful to me. So I'm joined by my friend Congressman Frost. I'm joined by the illustrious Erica Ford, who has been a movement builder for decades in this space, has made my hometown of New York a safer place by contributing to saving lots of lives. She'll tell us a little bit more about her work. My dear friend and collaborator, Samantha Fuentes, who is in the second film I had here, Us Kids, which chronicled the youth movement that grew out of the Parkland shooting, which was also something the congressman cut his teeth in furthering his activism after that time. And Jasmine, who is a survivor from Uvalde, who's joined us. Her 9-year-old sister, Jacqueline, was tragically killed as we near almost 1 year anniversary. And I welcome her parents as well with us today and acknowledge your loss and so many others here, not far from here. So I wanted to start by just sort of something we were talking about a little while ago at breakfast was, I wonder with whatever the staggering number, which I have here somewhere, of mass shootings, which of course represent a small fraction of gun violence in the country, but the media and the attention they generate do have a ripple effect of mental health for kids. And that's sort of the subject that I want to dig into today is youth and trauma. And there was a recent study that in the American Psychology Association that 75% of our youth report significant anxiety and trauma due to the fear of shootings. And we also know that over a third of gun deaths are suicide. The proportion of that for youth suicide is staggering in the last year or two. So I want to address today both what we're doing to address the trauma that already exists for people like Jasmine, Sam, and so many others, and also what we can do about it. So I wanted to pose this question to the group that I find myself thinking that as the numbers increase, and it's every, well over one a day since the new year, 100 and some mass shootings since the beginning of the year, I have it here, that I question whether a large portion of the adult, if there's a generational divide, and that a large portion of the adult population is becoming so inured, and I'm not saying that in an accusatory way because we can't take it in. We're becoming numb, and I'm wondering if that feels different in general for youth, whether they be directly afflicted because they don't have the luxury. They go into schools, they are out and about and thinking about this, I think, in a much more visceral way. So starting, I think, with Sam and Jasmine, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what your own experience is right now. How are you moving through PTSD, and what are you observing in your peers?
Well, I've been doing lockdown drills for as long as I remember, and it's such a uniquely American experience to fear for your life in school, and it's also, while gun violence does affect everyone, it mainly affects youth and children, and it's such a terrible thing that we go to school, tell our parents we love them because we might not make it home. I just can't think of other word other than it's just so disappointing, it's so sad, and well, that's why we're here. We don't want this to happen anymore.
And how are you doing personally?
Day by day, we're just trying to think of getting through the day before we think of getting through the week or the month or the year. But doing things like this, speaking out, telling my sister's story really helps with the grieving process.
One thing about just surviving a school shooting, being a survivor of gun violence in general, is that everything moves in waves. Everything is such a long, non-linear process. I was a senior in high school when I was shot with an AR-15. I was a senior in high school when I watched 2 of my classmates and friends die right in front of me. I'm a 23-year-old woman who considers myself to be very high-functioning, but still to this day, 5 years later, I still fear for my life. Whether that's in my college, at my job, on the subway. The PTSD that I experience is so visceral and sometimes is a daily experience for me. I still fear that even now that I've gone through something like this, that it'll happen again. And the only way that I am able to work through a lot of this trauma and a lot of my own grief is really to connect with other survivors, as well as advocate for something that I think will change not just this country, but the world. Because gun violence is so incredibly just devastating and so selfish. And for a lot of activists, we don't choose this for ourselves. This isn't just a hobby for me. It's a lifestyle. It will continue to be mine for the rest of my life. I can't detach myself from this ever. And I'll have to continue to not only suffer through my own grievances and my own trauma, but have to meet generations that follow me that will experience just the same thing that I did, if not worse. So the short answer is, I'm not great, really. As much as I'd love to say I am, as much as everyone loves to say how proud they are of me and how courageous I am, this is a very human experience. This is such an alienating and such a trivial experience to put through somebody, especially when you didn't get to choose this for yourself. I didn't get to choose to be an activist. I was thrown into it. I was a teenager. I was taken advantage of. I was exploited. I was spit on. I had death threats thrown my way because I advocated for something that I believed in, which is making sure that no one in this country has to be devastated by gun violence again. So truly, I'm as well as the world is right now, and that always fluctuates. So,
and Congressman, what was it in that 15-year-old self that jarred you that weekend? And I mean, do you remember how you felt to put yourself on a bus to DC?
Yeah, I mean, I was adopted at birth out of a situation that wasn't good. My biological family did not have money. There was multiple siblings, at least 7, and so I feel incredibly blessed and lucky to have been adopted by a family where I grew up in the suburbs, where I did not fear gun violence. It wasn't something I thought of until it was before a jazz band concert. I went to an arts middle school and a high school, and my friends and I were sitting at a restaurant, and there was just a silence that fell across the entire restaurant. We kind of look around, we look at the television screens, we see somebody walked into an elementary school, Newtown, Connecticut, murdered 20 children and 6 teachers. And I remember going to the show that night, playing incorrectly, dropping my sticks, staring at the exits, the anxiety just from literally seeing it on TV that it put in my 15-year-old self was extremely heavy. And I just felt this call to action in my heart and decided to go to DC for the memorial. And it was there, spending that week with the families, with the families of the victims, and just kind of hanging out, not really talking about it. And then the last day going to the vigil and hearing their stories. And I remember the night of the vigil, I was sitting around a pool with all of the kids who had come from Connecticut. And across from me was a guy named Matthew Soto. His sister Vicky was a teacher at Sandy Hook who hid her class in the closet to save their lives, and she was shot. And seeing a 16-year-old with the demeanor of a 60-year-old crying over his sister who was murdered for just going to school, it changed my life forever. I mean, I remember I went straight to my hotel room, I was crying, and I dedicated the rest of my life to fighting for a world where no one has to feel that pain. And y'all know there's a lot of reasons why people feel that pain in this world, gun violence being one of them. And that's what got me involved in this fight at 15 years old. 3 years later, armed bigotry and hate would hit my hometown of Orlando and claim the lives of 49 angels at Pulse nightclub. 3 months after Pulse, I would be downtown Orlando with some of my best friends on Halloween and survive a shooting that wasn't a mass shooting, but just 2 guys who had a problem with each other, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so that goes to this whole, something that I always talk to people about is expanding the definition of what we see as survivors, because there's people in this room who you might not consider yourself a survivor of gun violence, but you are. There are people who are surviving gun violence, the trauma that comes from surviving a shooting, or folks who live in neighborhoods who are constantly surviving gun violence, which is something that Erica does amazing work on. And so this issue, what I always say is this: mass shootings account for 1% of gun violence. I don't say that to diminish mass shootings. I say that so everyone realizes how big this problem is, because think about how big of a deal and how horrible and traumatic mass shootings are. There's mass shootings every day spread around this country, and this is a policy failure. Every death is a policy failure, and we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we were talking about, just at breakfast, about that exact point, that we are a nation of survivors. I always feel like, places that we used to consider developing countries, look at, us and, poor us with our kids that have to go to churches and schools and movie theaters and fear for their lives every day. But Erica, what are you doing in your community specifically? What are you seeing in terms of youth trauma, and what are you doing to address that?
So I would say that before I was 20, I was involved in more than 20 mass shootings, right? But at that time, we didn't call them mass shootings. I'm 58 years old now, and so I started doing this work at 22. And so in order to have the consistency to continue to struggle, like what Max is doing right now and these young ladies, you have to understand that there is a way out, right? Because if you're devastated by the trauma, then you'll believe that there is nothing to do. And as Jasmine was saying earlier, you'll stay in the bed all day, all night, and never want to get up. And so we help people heal. I have on a doctor's jacket right now because violence is a disease. It is a disease. And when we say we finally got the CDC to determine it a public health crisis, and with that, we go out and we help people understand the pain of trauma, living in communities, giving them the tools to help them transform that pain into power, that pain into purpose, through meditation, through yoga, through counseling, through mentorship, just getting them to go out and just like as a young, telling their stories, right? Because there's a lot of young people who are surrounded by people who have been shot, who don't know what to do, and they're scared, right? And so it happens over and over again, and then they go to school, and one thing might happen, and they would pop off. and they're suspended from school now, or incarcerated, and it's because of that pain, right? And so we have to not only help people to heal and transform, but we help people understand the human side of trauma. That when you see these young people, they don't want to commit acts of violence, right? People want to be healed. They want to be helped. And so we have to put more emphasis and energy and resources. And so we recently got Biden to invest a whole lot of funding into community violence intervention work across the nation. And what we're moving to do is to get that Break the Cycle of Violence Act signed as well, so that people can get funding to help people heal and transform, because there's a lot of hurt people in this world, and we know that hurt people hurt people.
So obviously I use my tools as a storyteller to humanize this issue, and I very much believe in the power of storytelling, not just for folks who need to break through the numbers and see the human side of this, but also as a tool for survivors themselves to reclaim their narratives. And to that end, Sam and I have collaborated for the past couple of years. She's been doing some amazing writing. She's a spoken word poet. And to really examine that terrain of youth trauma. So I want to roll a second clip of a small clip that is from Sam's writings that we put together. This was, as you'll see, on the occasion of 4 years after her shooting. There was a trial because her shooter lived, just as the shooter in Buffalo and some of these other shooters are not always perishing, which is another issue. But that was a whole another journey of being subpoenaed to show up in the trial of her shooter, and some of the feelings of trauma that came out of this. So this is a piece that she's written and collaborated with me that's in the works, called Death by Numbers.
Count 26 is the attempted murder in the first degree of Samantha Fuentes, which carries with it a 20-year minimum mandatory prison sentence under Florida's 1020 life statute. How do you wish to plead?
Guilty.
I am legally known as case number 26. The Grim Reaper was dressed as an 18-year-old boy with an assault rifle and a god complex. They will tell me I'm lucky. They will tell me I was brave. They are all wrong.
Good afternoon. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Okay, thank you. You can go ahead and have a seat.
I was facing a few of my classmates, two of which were shot dead right next to me. I had blood in my eyes and all over my face and in my hair. What you would have saw would disgust you.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 14S. Swab of a magazine found in a vest. Okay, and the results of your analysis?
The DNA results are consistent. The chances of randomly selecting an unrelated individual consistent with the evidentiary sample are rarer than 1 in 400 billion.
Okay, and I'm going to show you.
I was never good at math, but I remember every number. Room 1214. 5 minutes and 32 seconds from first shot to last. 17 killed. 2 dead kids next to me. 1 bullet in my leg. 15 stitches to close it. I was only 18. I wish I could stop counting. 3 kids killed themselves after the shooting at my high school. This is why numbers make my head hurt.
So, Sam, I was with Sam for over 2 months. I was sort of living through that trial this past summer, and it's such a tricky thing to figure out. First of all, I stand with survivor friends in sort of no notoriety and being very careful about not making this about the shooters, because it's never really about them. And I struggle with even addressing that. But at the same time, I hear sometimes young friends, like our friend David Hogg, will get up and say, racism is not a mental illness after the Buffalo shooting. And so many of these incidents have these underpinnings of searches for things related to white supremacism. And now we're seeing some of these trials where the prosecution is using language like domestic terrorism. What does justice look like, and how do we sort of grapple with this this phenomenon, if you will, that may link in with larger issues of hate and white supremacism? I'm just wondering what that evokes for you, or what you just saw, and what justice looks like in this kind of time.
Yeah, this is something that I've wrestled with and thought a lot about over the past decade. And really, at the beginning, justice was what it feels like for most people, right? Is the verdict of a case, what happens to, the person who did the wrongdoing or the murder, et cetera. But my mind kind of was changed and my heart was changed during the George Floyd uprisings that happened 2 years ago, which I, heavily protested in Orlando. I was tear gassed, I was maced, I was arrested, I went to jail. And in that time, and just struggling with my fellow organizers in Orlando, there was a chant that we would always do, which was, no justice, no peace, justice for George Floyd. And I remember one night we were doing that chant. It was raining, there was tear gas in the air. It was a very difficult night. People were getting arrested. And it kind of hit me, a very dark thought, but that I think is important that we all realize. And it's that once someone dies, the opportunity for justice has also gone away for that person, I believe. George Floyd is dead. The only sort of justice we can get is for the world to ensure that it never happens again. And it's a difficult thing to think about, because I think for us as humans, we feel like, what's the remedy to this horrible thing that happened, this loss of life? But it's so bad that I think we have to realize that what justice looks like is the conditions that we build after it. But justice isn't one murderous cop in jail. Justice isn't one murderous person in jail. That's accountability, which is important and needed. But I think justice is more than that. I think justice is the conditions for the rest of this world and future generations. And that's the way I think about it. And that was changed for me a lot during the protests.
And how does that accountability concept and justice transform into where you now stand of sometimes seeing maddening inaction by way of governance? Or, does that fit in with an idea of justice and a larger picture? I think the frustration that so many people feel about inaction of a lot of our lawmakers to do anything to contribute to that larger notion
Exactly.
of justice.
Well, because we live in such a carceral society, for most of our leaders, justice is very simple. It's someone behind bars. It's a verdict. And because of that, it allows them to scapegoat any actual action on changing the conditions of society and making sure it never happens again. Because maybe justice was served because someone was put behind bars or because someone was put to death, and they can wipe their hands clean and move on until the next mass shooting happens, till the next unarmed black person is killed, till the next, etc. And that's why I think as a movement it's important that we really expand what that definition of justice is. And what true justice is, when you walk into that chamber, is fighting every damn day for legislation that makes sure that this can never happen to anyone ever again. That is what true justice is. And Dr. Cornel West says all the time, justice is just love, right? And that's something I think about all the time. Justice is love in public life. And that's something I ran on, as you know, in my campaign, love through legislation. And when you love somebody, You want them to live free of gun violence. When you love somebody, you want them to have affordable housing. You want them to have health care. You want them to have a thrivable wage. You want them to have all the resources they need to have true freedom and liberty. That's what real justice is. But when justice is, one person, the consequences of one person or the accountability of one person, it allows our leaders to throw their hands in the air and not do anything.
And Jasmine, for you, have you thought about, it's so soon and raw for you, but what justice might look like in the future for your sister, Jacqueline?
I think Maxwell put it perfectly that nothing is ever going to be able to bring my sister back, which is what we would have wanted. But justice is exactly what he said, is making sure this doesn't happen to somebody else, making sure that these survivors get the help that they need. And like you said, accountability, there's so much lack of accountability that is still happening in my hometown, and justice would be for people to be held accountable.
Sam, in terms of what we saw in your experience through the trial and new thoughts post-trial?
Yeah, I think ultimately justice is also about making sure that no one's left behind. The people who have gone through devastating circumstances in their life, whether that was a result of gun violence or just violence in general, is taken care of. Because ultimately, what you see here is a panel of survivors. These are our trailblazers. These are the people that we rely to put a face to a movement. We rely on these people who are barely, scraping by, barely being able to get out of bed, to be the people who are our confidants, our informants, the people who are running. These are the people who, like I said, there's no detaching myself from what happened to me. This is who I am for the rest of my life. So justice looks like taking care of our people, making sure that the people that we're advocating for are actually being taken care of. Because gun violence doesn't just end when someone pulls that trigger and kills somebody and they're put into the ground. It's way after that. After the shooting at my high school, as you just saw in this clip, 3 students killed themselves, 2 of which did it with a loaded gun. How is it these kids who were just traumatized from a monumental shooting were able to access guns? Who was looking out for them? Where are your kids? How are your kids? How is your community? How are your neighbors? Who is looking after people? The reason that we turn to violence, the reason that we turn violence either to ourselves or into others is because we are hurt, we are suffering, and that cycle does not end. Justice looks like taking care of our people so that they can wake up and fight on another day. Because hell knows no one else is doing it. When you're not touched by something, when you're not devastated and traumatized, and every waking moment you don't think about it, it's easy not to be an activist. It's easy to not give a shit, because that's not your reality every single day. So I think justice, real justice, is making sure that the people like us can keep doing our jobs, making sure that the communities that have been devastated are getting the resources, the intervention that they need, the resources so that no one will have to turn to violence in the first place. That's it, because otherwise we keep losing people even years after a tragedy has happened, we continue to lose people. I myself still struggle with my PTSD, my depression, my anxiety, suicidal tendencies. I have no shame in saying that. But if we don't start acknowledging it, we're just continuing to lose. We are betting that our children will die. And we cannot, remain numb anymore. We can't just turn a blind eye and hope and pray that all our problems will go away. No. We have to be proactive. We have to make sure that every corner is covered, because these are the people who are leading this movement.
And Erica, I want to give you a chance to answer the justice thing, but I feel like I'm gonna bump you with your own words in a second. But it's in working in this space for the past 10 years or so, the voices of community survivors all across the country, not just in communities like Erica's in Newtown and Parkland in Orlando, this Pay It Forward, the voices of a movement that has been led a lot by survivors, and empowering that is something that just never ceases to amaze me, of people picking themselves up out of their own trauma like Sam and going to Uvalde to pay it forward. So following that slate of higher profile shootings, the Buffalo shooting, the shooting in Uvalde, there was a rally in DC. There were gatherings in Uvalde, obviously. So I want to roll this last clip with Erica, who attended the DC rally that we were all at, and Sam, the clip 3.
But what I did with my pain and my anger is I built a movement with my friends. And we created something addressing the disease of violence and knowing that we had to help people heal. So yes, you can talk about guns, but we got to talk about the mindset that makes people do things beyond control. If we don't put resources in these black and brown communities where our babies are dying every single day, then we are not talking about addressing gun violence.
There's more coming, or do I?
Yeah, just give it one moment. We're just, they're companion pieces here.
We are here because we want you to know that you are not alone. Uvalde is not alone, and you will never have to be alone. We are here on behalf of a community of survivors that understand the unbearable grief that lingers in the aftermath of a tremendous tragedy. We are here because the days, weeks, months, and years ahead of you are going to be hard, just like it was hard for us. But we want you to know that you must keep going. You must persist because we need you. Your community needs you. I need you. Your loved ones need you. Uvalde is strong. Uvalde is strong. Our kids deserve to feel safe everywhere they go. They deserve to live free of fear. Our kids have the right to go to school, to houses of worship, to the park, to the movies, and to be safe there. They deserve to play and have a life full of joy. Our children deserve to dream, soaring dreams of futures as pilots, as nurses, as teachers, as engineers. Our kids deserve to be kids, and they deserve to grow old. Let's start with the unifying truth that we all are on the same team, that we want nothing more than to protect our kids from violence so that they can just be kids. Let's start from there, and let's make a change.
So, one of the things I want to acknowledge, though, is in the 80s, the late 80s, when the phrase "no justice, no peace" was born, I remember it first coming out of my mouth leading a march of hundreds of thousands of people across the Brooklyn Bridge, and to sit here and hear you say when it first came out of your mouth, or, is the continuality. Justice is we don't have to do that no more. That he doesn't have to sit here at 58 years old with someone his age and hear them talk about when they first were, because love overcame hate, right? And so when we change the heart and souls of our people, then you're not looking to pick up that gun to resolve that interpersonal conflict or the pain that's inside of you. You're looking inside of yourself, you're looking at those around you, and you're healing and you're transforming, you're moving forward because there is a way out. There is a way out. And so what we did in New York City was we built something called the New York City Crisis Management System. And so we went in and we worked with those individuals who had the highest risk to be shot or to shoot someone. And so when you look at someone who just experienced being a victim of violence, they have the potential to now be the perpetrator of violence. And so we make sure that we help them heal. We provide those therapeutic services. We work with the friends and families of those directly surrounded by that violence and change mindset. And we've had the success of going up to 4 years in a neighborhood where 4 people were killed a year. We went up to 4 years where no one was killed. Where 17 people were shot a year, we went up to 562 days where no one was shot. In the entire city, we had a week where no one was killed. In New York City, which is one of the biggest cities, right? We thought the machine was broke because we weren't getting the data. But we changed mindset. We went a whole weekend where no gun went off at all in the entire New York City. And it was in the summer where the potentiality for violence is high. And so what we do works. And it is about dressing it as the disease. It is about investing in people's healing and equity in our communities. Because people who live in poverty live in pain. And so if we're changing the conditions of our people and we're changing the mindset, then we're looking at justice, right? And we have to continue to invest in what works. And so that's why we have that continual conversation of whether we put all our energy into legislation or we put our energy into transforming communities, right? And so we have to continue working both sides of that gun.
And when you talk about mindset, where my head is going is there is so much that is directed by media and everything else into the politicization of this issue, and something that, as you were speaking, I was thinking about that I always take in, Congressman, when you get up and often talk about it's not red or blue, it's the people versus the problem, which is exactly what Erica, I think, just described in her community of people taking power to address a problem, and that we can't really afford anymore this bipartisan thing. So I just, how is that for you, having come from the outside, now you're on the inside, and moving this, I want to get into an interactive space, but moving toward sort of what can we do and what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, having, worked on this issue for about a decade now, I think you realize that in federal politics, this is one of the slowest moving issues, if not the slowest moving one. And so you have to take a step back and do an analysis. Why? And there's a lot of different reasons, but what we see, I'll give you universal background checks, for instance. It's actually the most popular gun policy in the country. A majority of NRA members are actually for it. A majority of Republicans are for it, and obviously a majority of Democrats are for it. So it's bipartisan. But the word bipartisanship takes a different definition when you get into the halls of Congress. Bipartisan for all of us means what we can agree on, universal background checks. Bipartisan in Congress is what the NRA and corporate interests are okay with, and they're not okay with that. And because of that, because people are valuing profits over people, we can't pass something as simple as universal background checks. Then the second part of this is working as legislators to expand what we see gun violence prevention as being, right? Oftentimes you think gun violence prevention, you think universal background checks, banning assault weapons, etc. Very important things we need to fight for it. But the other side of this, and that Erica is talking about, is how do we get money into our communities? So, because violence starts in the community, it's going to end the community, and we have to fund that. We have a very narrow definition of what public safety means in this country right now, and citizens and communities are nowhere a part of that definition. And in case anyone wasn't listening to what Erica just said, they call for a ceasefire in their city, and no one dies. And I don't want people to think I'm going on an anti-police thing, but there's no police department that can do that. That's why we need to fund community centers, community people who understand this violence intervention to be a part of that apparatus. It's not the only part, but a large part of that apparatus. And I think that's just very important because the work that Erica does literally saves lives. The work that her and her staff and her interrupters do save lives. We all deserve those programs in our communities, but we don't have them. And that's when the legislation comes into play. We should pass the Break the Cycle Act so we can get $5 billion allocated over the next 8 years to community programs so they can be a part of the public safety apparatus in their communities because they're on the ground, they're credible messengers, and they know, like Erica said, how to identify who's most likely to be shot and how to identify who's most likely to shoot someone and go to those people directly and end the violence before it happens. That's the difference between being reactive and proactive. And we need everything in a country where we lose 100 people a day due to gun violence.
So I really want to open this up to questions, I guess by raise of hand, comments, questions, or someone. Oh, good. A less shy crowd. Is there someone with a microphone? Let's see. I guess I'll.
You want mine?
I will call on. There's someone in the back there. I don't know if someone's floating around with a mic or.
I think it's the one in the sunglasses and red hair. Don't you have sunglasses and red hair? Oh, okay, cool. Oh, hold on. No. So wait, come here. Yeah. I see you. Okay. Give the pretty lady the mic. Okay.
So I'm starting to get scared that instead of kind of containing it and lessening it in America, that the gun culture here is leaching out. I'm from Iceland, and within the last month, we had a kid show up to school with a 3D printed gun because he was mad at a teacher. And that gets me scared that the same way the anti-LGBTQ sentiment is spreading to the youth across the world, that the angry kids across the world are getting kind of the same inspiration from the American gun culture. Is there anything you think we can do to kind of curtail this?
So the kid who had a problem with the teacher, people knew about that before and after, right? And so the question is, we have to be our own interrupters, right? We have to, when we see a kid in need, when we see a employee in need, we can't just say, oh, that's him. Like that's, or like, yo, yeah, they did you wrong. You know, putting batteries in the back. We have to take the batteries out the back. We have to surround them with love. We have to help them heal and see another way out of their pain and anger, right? And so if we continue to spread that, then you continue to cure the disease. But people are copycat. We got to show them something else. The more they see, the more they follow, right? So let's in our own, the folks right here in this room, if we just started promoting something else, having different conversations about checking your children's heart, check their heart, really check in with them. Check their book bags, check under the bed, check in the bushes, right? Lock your guns up so that your kids can't get active, or somebody who's in a moment of anger can't get access to it. And then the situation will be a different response.
Yeah, I would also say, too, this is a really good point about, and this is, I just went on my first trip out of the country in my whole life. I went on a legislative exchange to Japan, and they don't really have gun violence there. And something I realized is just how much we always talk about American exports in terms of business, but we are exporting violence. Gun violence, bigotry, homophobia from what we're doing here. We're exporting fascism. Look at what happened in Brazil with their almost insurrection. Do you think that came out of nowhere? They saw what happened here, and it was replicated there. And I think it's important to realize that. And so something I've been thinking about is how do we get the international community to apply more pressure on our country to fix this problem of gun violence, because it impacts other countries too. And something that our friend Manuel Oliver, told me he had an idea of is how many dual citizens are killed in this country a year due to gun violence? How do we get those numbers and talk with these other countries and say, you're losing your citizens in our country because we don't have our act together, put that pressure on the United States. So it's just, whoever brought that up, it's a really good point to keep in mind.
Hi, my name is Susie Fogarty. I'm a 25-year educator from Omaha, Nebraska. I couldn't help but be impacted by the comment that you made, Congressman Frost, about how people value profits over our kids. And from attending this conference for the last 48 hours to see the people in the room that attend this as compared to people that are going to the rooms to make profit. I want to know, how do we get more people in the room?
We have more people in the room right now, right? Because there used to be no people in the room. And so if we switch our mindset, right, to value the people in the room, what can we do with the people in the room? Because I always used to be one of those. There ain't enough people. And I'm spending so much time worrying about the people that ain't here, not spending time focusing on the people that are here. And who's supposed to be here is here. Because it's the quality of people and not the quantity of people that changes the world.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there's two.
Hello.
Lights are really bright.
Hi, my name's Ed Scruggs. I've lived here and been involved in the movement for 10 years. And I actually had to step back after Uvalde because just couldn't take it anymore. Too much pain, too much loss. There's a lot of trauma floating around for those of us that have worked in this. Of course, it doesn't compare with the victims, but Congressman Frost, I'm really interested, being from Florida, being moved by this as a 15-year-old. Could you imagine we'd be in this place now? You had to, as a young person, believe we're going to get involved and solve this. And now Florida may be decreasing the minimum age to buy a gun now. Unthinkable. How do you keep the hope alive? How have you changed over time? Can you talk about a little bit of what you've gone through and how you've arrived at the place you are today?
Yeah, this is a great question. And honestly, what's kept me into this for this long and now running for office and everything are like the people in the movement, to be honest. There are times where I've wanted to give up or I don't want to use give up, because I think sometimes you need to take a step back to take care of yourself. Self-preservation is really important. So there are times I need to step back and then come back in. But I think the relationships, the calls, we talk about call to action, right? Mine was the Sandy Hook shooting, but I can think of probably thousands of call to actions that I've had throughout my life that have kept me into the fight. A conversation I've had with someone, meeting somebody, right, and learning their story. And it gives you that extra mental fortitude and stamina to stay into it. And that's why I tell my staff, and I always tell my organizers too, is ground yourself in the stories of the impacted folks you are working for and you're working with. And if you do that, you will never have to search for the reason that you're here. It's the same thing why I decided to run for office. People ask, I have a lot of like, young college dem kind of people come up to me and we talk and I love them. But oftentimes people come up and say, I want to run for office. What do I do? And I say, well, that's the first problem. See, my goal, and I think our goal shouldn't be about what you want to be. It should be about what you want to do. And if you don't know what you want to do, running for office is not for you right now. Right? And so it should be attached to something very specific. And for me, that all came from the stories. I think our most valuable tool we have is storytelling. So I love hearing Kim talk about storytelling through different mediums. And I think of myself as a storyteller. And really, those stories it's what's kept me into this. And playing the drums. Yeah.
Hi. It made me really emotional to hear you talk about this as a healthcare crisis. My nephew is 8, and when I saw him earlier this year, it made me very emotional to hear you speak as well, because he's very much not okay. And when I kind of pressed on that a little bit, his parents told me that within a week period, the school was forced to go through, fully locking down and having a tactical force like sweep the school like twice in a week. He is so not okay. And the only tool that I have as a storyteller is I can connect nonprofits with foundations and get them money. So I would love to know what foundations are out there that are giving enough money away in a way that's useful and in a way that's helpful, and what nonprofits are out there that are approaching this as a healthcare problem and are working with young kids in a way that's useful, because I don't think what happened to him is unusual. And I think that's probably a lot more common than people understand.
Well, it just so happens the lady right there, Teach Amanda Fish, is a foundation that has been supporting us for years. And there's a lot of foundations that support a lot of folks across the nation, but there needs to be more, because they don't, I feel they don't support it because the problems look so big. People like, I don't want to put my money there because it's not going to be resolved. But we have to change the narrative and that it can be resolved if we just put more. It's like a double under, but so there's Teach Amanda Fish, there's Open Society, there's Amber, Community Justice Action Fund knows a lot of those different things, but we could get you that list of foundations, definitely.
Hi, I'm a graduating senior from UT Austin right now, and interested in policy, and have had the good fortune of working with local and state government, and hopefully going to move farther and hopefully able to make more of a difference. I know, Ms. Ford, you mentioned how we can make a difference as just society and just keeping an eye out, but moving into or hopefully having more influence in Congress and working for congressmen and maybe senators, what do you suggest someone like young college Dems, like what do you think we should do, what we can do to make a difference from the inside, or any little thing that we can do?
That's you.
Well, I'd say, number one, being in a club or an organization is super important, right? Like, you are building power. And I think finding out, like, for instance, if y'all want to work on gun violence, figuring out how you can plug into a lot of the local work that's existing and plug into that and lend them your capacity and work together to build power. One of the greatest problems we have, especially in progressive movements, is everybody likes to start their own thing, which is cool sometimes, but then we end up not working together. If the oppression is linked, the organizing has to also be linked, or else we're spread out and we're siloed. And I think a great thing that college Dems, Young Democrats, March for Our Lives, all these groups, especially on campuses, is y'all can pull together and fight for justice on campus, but also outside of campus. How are you connecting to what's going on in Austin? Community violence interrupters, hosting forums, different things like that. And I also say lending your voice from a media perspective is important too, because when the students talk, people really listen. And I think figuring out how you can really be involved in that local movement is important. And then also from the side of, create good relationships with your legislators and folks. People who live here in Austin, y'all lucky. You got two great, you got Lloyd Doggett and Greg Casar. He's my bestie in Congress. So two great people, and form a great relationship with the member, but also with their staff. People don't realize staff, they run the show in these offices. And so make a good relationship with the staff members and talk to them about what can happen. Also, real quick on the money, the government, through the American Rescue Plan and a few other bills, there's a lot of money for community violence intervention out there, healthcare programs for community violence interruption and everything like that. The group that Amber Goodwin created, Community Justice Action Fund, only Black and Brown-led national gun violence organization. They have a great website. I forgot the name of it, but they're plugging people in directly to these grants. Do you know the name of the website? Okay, yeah, CJ, yeah. Yeah, so Community Justice Action Fund, I would definitely look into them. They're doing great work in connecting communities, and speak with your member of Congress and, work with them to get these grants, because that money's just sitting there from the conversations I've had with the administration. Not enough people are applying for it. And I think it's because not a lot of people know what community violence intervention is, and that's what we're trying to talk to people about that.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Michelle Berg from Vox Media. First of all, a dear friend of mine, Scott Beagle, was shot and killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart, but I do want to ask the question about our online communities. You all talked a lot about our in real life communities, but I'm curious to hear your opinions around regulation for internet communities. As we know, this is a place where young people often get radicalized and are put in touch with these very dangerous ideas. So curious to hear about tech regulation, your thoughts, and as young people, how do you impact other young people on the internet to act responsibly or get the help they need when you're flagged of somebody's, exhibiting, behavior that's dangerous? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that people often use this phrase, which is if you see something, you say something. Oftentimes, though, even if you do say something, the person or the source that you direct your concern or your complaint to often does not take you seriously. That is precisely what happened at my school. My shooter exhibited traits that were bigoted, hateful, and intolerant towards the student body, would got into attacks, used many racial slurs, the N-word, so on and so forth. Somebody who was flagged as a problem person from the very beginning. Multiple failures on multiple fronts as far as the school, as far as the sheriff's offices and so on and so forth. So I think the biggest thing is that, like, absolutely say something. If you see somebody in your community whom you understand their character to a certain extent and they starting to act outside of that, you need to start engaging with these people and being able to identify those particular behaviors, learning what is dangerous for themselves and for others, and being able to intervene earlier on instead of when things do get violent, when things do escalate. Because oftentimes before somebody picks up a gun, they do and demonstrate different behaviors before that point. And so if we do not become familiar with the patterns that these people have, which is not unique to them, what I like to say is, and unfortunately, there is somebody planning another mass shooting right now as we speak, and they are very much like the shooter whom almost ended my life. This mentality of hate and bigotry and intolerance is not unique to somebody. It's a collective ideology that is a huge problem in this country. And when we start identifying those signs, we're able to knock down those pillars of hate and stop the spread. So you really, I think, is being able to identify that as it, and being able to call it out. Racism is not a mental illness. Bigotry and putting people down, especially on the internet where you can be an anonymous, faceless person. Being able to call people out, being able to report them, being able to report them to accountable sources is the biggest thing you can do, and the biggest thing as an advocate that you can do, even just in your local community. So that's hopefully
I think we might have time for one more, but I just want to, we'll end with you, address one question that came up online, which is about how we tell these stories. And I think we do, that's like a whole other session about how the media addresses gun violence. I think we do have to be very careful. And, I try to take great care. I try to do longer things. I'm developing a piece with Congressman Frost that maybe has underpinnings of these issues, and Sam and I are collaborating. But I think it's really important, as you said, Erica, to lift up alternate narratives and ones that aren't just sort of repeating the same cycle. We do have to be careful about copycatters and people who say, I want to be on the news as the next shooter. So I want to address that.
Hi, my name is Angela Gomez. I live here in Austin, Texas. First off, I want to say I'm extremely honored to be in the same room with all of you, and thank you for coming here today. This is a lot to take in, but I've been involved with the ACLU, Planned Parenthood since the 90s. Protested heavily with George Floyd, took my daughter. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and it boggles my mind that she has less rights today than I do. And I feel like we're continuing to go backwards. And you brought up a very good point, Congressman Frost, is that it's all about the money. And I feel like beyond, all of these issues, the gender freedom, women's freedom, et cetera, it's all connected to the twin systems of white supremacy and capitalism. And I'm gonna quote the great James Baldwin here and say, how long do we have to wait for progress?
Do we have time for one last question? No? Okay, I think we've run our session out here, but I thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you.